This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
I am Phil, VP of Strategy at Thrive Digital.
I'm Maddie, or Madeline, and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy here at Thrive.
I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchett. Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to Season 3 of The Hypothesis. Very excited to have you all here.
I'm really excited for the topic today.
I am so curious what Phil has to say on this subject.
I have some thoughts.
Well, let me introduce it then. So I'll jump into what the hypothesis is today. It's going to be a little more free format today, but I just basically want to chat about if you were taking over the marketing department of an e-commerce, DTC, consumer-facing brand, what would those first 90 days look like for you? Just drawing from your experience working with lots of new clients, seeing different types of marketing leaders, seeing what works well, seeing what doesn't. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. And I've specifically kind of wanted a lot of data people here because I think a lot of those first 90 days should be a lot of good data collecting and listening. So I'm going to pass to Eric first and see what he has to say about this.
You've probably heard me say this before, but it all starts with the market, right? I mean, if you're going to be a marketer, you have to be one of the people at the organization that knows the market better than everyone else at the organization. So I think absolutely first thing I would do heading into a new company is to understand the market. So what can I learn about customers? What can I learn about customer reviews? How do I get into the mindset essentially of the customer? There's a few ways to do that. I mean, customer reviews is one. Of course, nowadays we can use, Claude or ChatGPT to actually better understand or aggregate those customer reviews really quickly. But there's other ways too. So as an example, how can I put myself in front of the actual customers? Can I join customer service calls? If we have commercial partnerships with third-party retailers and those types of things, how do I get on those sales calls and just understand the market first? Because everything else comes out of that. And I know that that's not really a data answer, I guess, from you asking me first, but that's where everything else stems from. We need to understand sort of where we are today, where we're going, and why we're going there. And the most important piece of information that will feed into all of that is who is our market? How big is our market? How do they think? How do they talk about our products? How do they talk about the vertical of products that we're in and all of those?
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to abstract us slightly from the customer side of things. Because Eric, I completely agree. You need to be listening to that customer kind of more so than anything as a marketer to understand what it is that's resonating about that product for them. Why are they purchasing again and again? And why did they purchase in the first place? But I think one of the biggest things that I'll share from my experience is you've seen leaders come in with very different mindsets. You can see leaders coming into an organization with the mindset of, I need to fix everything in the first 90 days versus coming in being I'm going to listen for the first 90 days and figure out my plan. So one of the big pieces of advice I would say, start with the end in mind. So if you're coming into an organization, within that first 90 days, you should set your goal up to be, I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can about the customer, about the product, about the marketing program, my teams, my C-suite. Learn everything you possibly can to build this holistic picture of what's actually going on within the business, so that you can make more and more informed decisions. And not to sound too corny, but those first 90 days are not for just making noise. They're for listening. So you should be there to just purely pick up as much as you can so you can bring forwards as a leader your plan after that 90-day period to really have an impact on that full marketing program. So that's my slightly different take, I suppose, abstracting a level, but that would be how I'd approach things.
I totally agree with that. And, one thing I would even add to that is making friends with the finance team.
Yep.
Right. So understanding how budget decisions are made, understanding the profitability of different product segments, understanding essentially the business logic that goes into those decisions. I think that a lot of marketing leaders don't spend enough time thinking about that. They go straight to the fun parts of marketing, right? I think that spending that time to really understand how the business functions, what business logic is there, really helps marketing leaders, because they can then tie their own results back to the language of that business.
Yeah, and I think that, like, to build on that, people can come in with their own preconceived notions of what success should look like or what needs to happen. But if you haven't looked at the data, or you haven't looked at the individual business and like the history of the product segments or product categories that are actually performing, you can make some wrong calls early on and start to, I guess, like, build that brand internally of like, I don't know my numbers. We need to lean on that VP or marketing director as like the person who understands the economics of the business from front to back and can guide us as the agency in this case. But that also goes to the internal teams as well. People respond to incentives, and if they are given the wrong goal or given the wrong overall direction from this new leader because they don't understand that level of information from the finance team, things can go sideways pretty quick. So that's another, again, like, important point you raise, Eric, of you need to be aware of that product set, margins, and overall how you're working with the finance team to make decisions.
I guess I would plus one the theme that both of you are kind of touching on through different angles, and that's discovery, and I guess questioning any assumptions you might be coming in with via real data collection in terms of having conversations with people, talking to the finance team, digging deep into the data around products, unit economics, etc. I think that a lot of the time we see marketers get hired into a role based on their experience coming from a similar industry or having sold a similar product. I guess what's unique for us working at an agency is we see all different sorts of e-commerce companies that sell different things. So we don't take for granted, KPIs or different considerations, but still within this idea of a D2C e-commerce brand, like, there's so many different types of products that you could sell and so many considerations around selling strategy and unit economics that come with that. And I think that it would be easy to make assumptions or come in and say, well, I work with somewhat a similar product or somewhat a similar industry, or I just have experience selling things online, so this is what we're going to do. This tactic works, this ad format, this is the KPI. When in reality, like, you could be working with two entirely different products. Like, for example, more of a consumer packaged goods style product where you're selling like hair care online in a subscription, and it's like high frequency, and your KPI is probably not return on ad spend. It's much more LTV, churn rates. Like, those are the things that matter. Or like a long-term, like, durable good, like a refrigerator or a mattress, where the comparison research is so important. So content strategy matters way more. The measurement is going to be a way bigger consideration in terms of that long customer journey. So I think really coming in and looking at each of these assumptions you're coming in with and going and figuring out, I think the place to start is always, what is the goal of my leadership? And then how do I translate that into my own goal and my own objective? Because you could, like, of course, I think this bigger objective is around discovery, but that could be unending. You could turn over every single rock, which I think could take up all of your energy. But I think if you start with, this is the mandate, this is the product, and this is the goal, and translate that into a KPI, and then work backwards from there, you can cut out a little bit of the detail and the noise, and you can make sure that you're building relationships with the specialist on kind of each of those areas that you're going to need to focus on, like email or media or influencer, what have you. But starting first of all with a really deep understanding of what the product is and what Eric spoke about, the customer, the market. How are we actually selling this product, and what KPIs matter based on that? And then what is the actual stated goal for this year? And that becomes that organizing principle around, okay, how do I break that down into my next 90 days?
So maybe one of the big questions to answer in that first 90 days is, what does success look like at the 12-month mark? And outline that very, very clearly.
Yeah, or if you're onboarding in September, maybe you're not seeing past December and Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Christmas sales. It's like, okay, you've set this annual goal. We know that 60% of that is coming through the next quarter. Are we off pace? Are we on pace? Do we need to make a dramatic change in terms of marketing budgets and adding a new channel? Like,
Yeah.
that really changes the urgency and kind of your prioritization matrix.
I haven't checked recently, but I know the last time I looked, the average tenor of like a marketing director or marketing VP is, I think, like less than 2 years. And so I think there's a lot of like expectations placed upon those marketing leaders, and especially if it's like a publicly traded company or something like that, I think there's a lot of expectations. So I want to talk to about like getting buy-in on asking those questions and figuring out what our first strategic objective is under the lens of knowing there's pressure, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I see a ton of stuff on LinkedIn all the time about the pressure that marketing leaders are under, and how that they're generally one of the first people to go if things aren't going well. And generally, that means there needs to be a full, I guess, like onboarding experience that you guide yourself through in order to set yourself up for success over the long term. So I guess to answer your question, Santana, like what some of those questions are, you need to go around and understand where the decision makers are, why the decisions have been made the way they have historically. So if you found that, for example, we are optimizing towards, let's say, just ad platform ROAS, and we've tried to do lift testing before, but it just never happened. Why is that? Like, where is that blocker happening? And try to understand and unpack why those things are actually occurring. The other piece is just understanding, where different people's, I hate to say politics, but like where their politics actually align. So what does finance think of a marketing team? What does marketing think of finance? What do they think of the direction from the C-suite? Trying to understand the power dynamics is going to be really important for that leader to be able to unpack what they need, because marketing is not something that is done in a silo. It is a central service that services the whole business, that touches finance, creative, the C-suite, a whole host of different departments that are all involved in it. So you need to be able to go and like understand all of that in a very, I guess, like a robust way, and not start to obviously play sides or anything, but really just understand how that culture actually operates and how you get things done. Because I think it's easy sometimes to just go back and say, oh, I can't do this because we've never done it. But as a new leader, you can go in and say, actually, no, we should be doing this because of XYZ reasons. Those are kind of like some broad areas that I would be asking questions on, as well as going down the route of like, why the current product assortment? How are we listening to customer feedback right now? What are your goals for the next 6, 12, 18 months? And really trying to understand everyone's, I guess, long-term view of the business.
If I can be so bold, though, part of that should also be discovered during the interview process itself, right? So like if you're starting a new role at an organization, I think it's really important to get to the bottom of how that team, how that organization makes some of these decisions, because I can think about it for myself. Like if I were to be going into an organization that was measuring marketing's effectiveness off of like in-platform return on ad spend, that's not going to be a good match, right? Like I know that I'm just going to be fighting a battle, but that's a bit of a waste, right? Like it's a waste of my time, it's a waste of their time. Like they need someone that is just going to focus on that, right? And so finding that alignment, I think, is really important too.
I was operating on the assumption we'd swiped right on each other in that interview process, but it's a completely fair point that you'd want to make sure those fundamentals are in place. But I'd also say like that feels a little idealistic almost, to go and think you know everything about the business from like that interview process, because even though you might get told a lot and like gone through and maybe had your questions asked very, very cleanly, I think when you start to like pull the cover back, you might start to find a lot more stuff around how the organization actually operates. So sorry to say everything, Eric, I didn't mean it like that. But basically going down a route of saying there's always going to be more to find and start to unpack.
This is the same with when we onboard a new client. I mean, we typically swipe right on each other based on, values alignment. And then it gets into the day-to-day, the practicalities, the operations, and people want shortcuts. They want metrics that tell them something fast. We're simple. We don't like complicated systems. We don't like to have to visualize the complex marketing ecosystem in order to make decisions. And so I think that, of course, you want to look for values alignment, but the role of a marketing leader, a huge part of it is just educating the C-suite, educating the finance team on the role of marketing, which is not just short-term revenue creation, it's long-term revenue creation. And that is not an easy thing to measure. And it takes investments in certain areas, and it takes, aligning on the correct metrics that aren't just easily translated. And so it's really important to invest. And again, I don't think this is a 90 days activity. I think most people understand that a measurement and the process of building buy-in for changing metrics or KPIs takes longer than 3 months, but starting to have early conversations around, why are we doing things this way? What are our break-even points? If I were to add in additional signals to the current reporting, could we start that way? Could we start adding rather than removing and, scorched earth policy? I'm going to come in and clean house, get rid of all the current reporting, leave the marketing team confused. Like, it's really that slow additive process, coming in, asking the right questions, getting the rooms warmed up. And that's really, education, relationship building. That's really important.
I like that, getting the rooms warmed up. That's a nice way to put it.
It's such a good point, though, too, right? Because if you are hired into that type of environment where the sort of incentives aren't necessarily aligned with what we would think of as an agency, as Thrive, as being the right things to think about. So thinking about incrementality and thinking about true impact from marketing and across the entire customer journey and all of those things. So if you go into that environment where, the CFO is very focused on return on ad spend and these quick and easy to measure metrics that aren't necessarily aligned with, long-term business growth, how do we balance that between, getting those goals that they hired you for done, but then, continuing that education? So Maddie, I really like what you said there about sprinkling in some additional KPIs or sprinkling in some of that additional data to sort of not necessarily just have a right turn to a new way of doing things, but to start introducing those concepts over time while you're still, getting shit done for the current incentives.
I mean, yeah, perfect example. Again, if we're talking about maybe a subscription brand, you could come in, maybe they sell on obviously D2C, maybe Amazon, and they have a revenue goal for the year, and things are looking great. Unpack that a layer further, maybe new customer revenue is flat or dipped. Let's look at that. Maybe there's a success story and a question and, a rabbit hole that we do need to go down. But yeah, just starting to unpack those metrics and introduce kind of the right ones, again, that are very much tied on the unit economics for those financial KPIs that your C-suite is going to care about. That's kind of the work that needs to be done.
This kind of leads me to my next question, which is something that we commonly see, I would say, is that when new marketing leaders come in, they want to put their stamp on things and make big changes. How do you all suggest evaluating legacy processes, legacy software, legacy partnerships? Talk to me about evaluating what's already going on in the marketing department, because we've talked about certain questions of the foundational business, like business metrics, unit metrics, but how are you evaluating the legacy things within marketing specifically?
Okay, well, if you can't interpret the findings of this tool, if you need a third party to interpret it for you, it's probably bad. Some tools are just there for automating efficiency and reporting and so on and so forth. But let's say it's an insights tool or something. If you can't get the what and the so what from that, I mean, it's time to rethink. I think a lot of the time, these more complex measurement tools come in to solve, the biggest problems, but then, the presentation of results, no one knows what to do with them. So I think if you're just you and also the rest of your team is really struggling to interpret the what of what that vendor is bringing, and they aren't giving that to you clearly, I think that's a good place to start in terms of questioning their place with your org. That's a pretty simple place to start, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been on the receiving end of this, many a time before, where a new point of contact joins one of our clients, and as a result, kind of we end up being under the microscope, which is again completely fine in those new circumstances, because any new lead is going to want to know, what am I inheriting from the previous person in this role? And if they're responsible for the numbers, they want to make sure they've got the right people on the field to play at any given moment. So one of the things that jumps out for me there, and I've seen this happen time and time and again, is new leader coming in, not necessarily taking the time to understand how partners have been set up for success. So if the incentives of those partners are misaligned, or the previous leadership has not necessarily been setting that partner up for success, then you should try and rectify that situation, because that partner probably has a lot of back knowledge that you don't have around why decisions have been made and what the situation of the program actually is at that given point. So they can actually be an ally for you, I would say, in that onboarding period. And if there are weaknesses or opportunities that you see in that period that are not being actioned on, then I think that's a reasonable place to go and say, yeah, maybe we need to switch partners. But there needs to be a chance given to the existing partners to set them up for success and make sure that they've got everything they need to really unblock growth for that business. Because I've seen it go a number of different ways, where a client's come in and said, yep, I have my agency I like to work with, I'm just making that call, when we know that there's a lot more that we could have been doing. But I've also seen it go kind of the other way, where a client's given us a lot of time and space to go on and improve different things based on what we know needs to happen on a project. But then the client said, yeah, actually, I've given you that chance, but I'm still going to move on to XYZ other agency. And that's fine. We want to make sure that people are working with who they're comfortable with, but you've got to give that partner a chance to be able to prove themselves, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Just to take a step back, I think like what we were talking about before of the take the discovery approach, don't take the scorched earth policy approach, like definitely it figures into this conversation too. Like have those conversations, that gather the historical context, get the whole picture before you make drastic moves that make people angry at you.
It's down to asking the right questions too, right? Like you don't want to go in and just start asking very basic questions to your agency or get them to mark their own homework. You want to be putting some pressure on to be like, cool, how are we actually working together? Put them in a position where they need to like prove their worth, and really start to look under the hood yourself. So what's going on within ad accounts? What's going on in the brief process? How are our weekly meetings looking? What does reporting look like? All of those different things I think can be really impactful, just to like gather as much, again, information and discovery as you can, so you can make that right call. But anyway, Eric, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, all good. Yeah. I've sort of been thinking about it because I feel like there's like a layer in between what you both have been talking about. Anyways, the way that I look at like a marketing department would be, you essentially have like a portfolio of investments, right? And so if you were to break down your marketing department into these different programs, which each have their own incentives. So you might have paid ads in one, you might have life cycle marketing, you might have content marketing, you might have SEO, you might have these various different programs. And then paid advertising is oftentimes big enough that you have multiple programs underneath that. Maybe you're focusing on awareness in one of them, and maybe you're focusing on just capturing demand in the market in another, etc. But I think especially coming into a role like that, it's really important to understand those different programs and the historical performance against the incentives that they had. Without going too far into like the data portion, it's just like making sure that all of that is organized so that you understand, hey, these programs are actually profitable, these ones aren't, or we believe that these programs are profitable, so we're going to let them continue for a while, right? And we're going to focus elsewhere on the programs that are either not profitable or whatnot, right? And to make sure that you don't end up with a bunch of shelfware, because we were talking about tools and those types of things. I mean, if you have a tool that isn't supporting one of those programs, or it's only attached to a program that is not profitable, I mean, just kill it, right? I agree. You don't want to go in and start changing things drastically in the first 90 days. But at the same time, if you see something that's egregiously not profitable, it should be dead, right? Either heavily tweaked or just killed altogether. Because, we can see it plain as day that, this is not driving value for the business.
I would venture a guess too that you would learn a lot about your internal team by like digging in. It's like how good was the data collection, what the tool management's like, right? Like if it's a big enough organization, they're going to have a team is also a thing that I think is important to talk about.
That's true, but they might have had a poor leader before you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to give a little bit of context to that because, sitting with me right now are three very strong leaders. Like all of you have really great average employee turnover in terms of like thrivers tend to stay a long time and our people tend to perform well and grow and learn. And so I'm interested to hear your perspective, even just as leaders, of evaluating those existing teams or how you evaluate your employees. And yeah, I think that's just interesting context for the audience to have. We're not just like talking about from the experience of marketing here. It's also like as tenured leaders, if that's not too broad.
I was just going to say the number one thing that for any new team member, this goes for new team members, this goes for new teams, for building a team, etc. For me, one of the most important things is to build and establish trust with each individual team member, not with the team as a whole, right? So there's ways of, building a community with a team, getting them all together in a room, for example. You can do brainstorming and learn how people think and learn how people interact with each other and contribute and all of those kinds of things. As a leader, you need to be sort of watching for that and try to read between the lines on what's happening there, what dynamics are happening. But equally as important to that sort of group interaction is the one-to-one interactions where we are meeting with people who are working alongside us within that team, and we're building trust with them, right? And so as a new leader, for example, there's lots of different ways of doing that. Everyone has a bit of a different style. One element that has really helped me is just trying to be helpful, almost to a fault, right? Especially at the beginning, like you're proving that you actually understand the work that this person is doing. You can help them if they need help, but also you're building up that trust, which goes both ways, so that you can trust them when eventually you sort of pull back from being quite as close, right? So when I bring on a new team member into our data team, for example, I meet with them a lot at the beginning. The first 2 weeks, it's every day. That starts to peter down depending on what they need. But that really helps me to establish that trust, establish a rapport, establish ways of communicating between that person, and really sets a strong foundation for each of those team members. If you're coming into a new team, you still need to go through that process. It's a lot of work. I think a lot of leaders think, oh, hey, I'm too busy. I got too many things to think about and all of that. But to me, that's top of the priority list.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think there's kind of two bits I would, I guess, throw into the mix. As someone new coming into that team as a leader, I think you need to be careful not to critique past performance, but position everything as an evolution. Because I think it could be quite easy to go in and try and place blame potentially on like, well, why are we doing this X person when they may have been operating under, let's say the poor leader before you or something like that. So in terms of coming in and like starting afresh, I think you do need to position everything really as like evolution and not blame, and not have that approach to leadership. I think the other piece to that is just making sure that everyone's clear on the leadership style that you have. So again, we've already said like everyone's got a different leadership style, but the leadership style that generally I go for with people is more of like servant leadership. So I'm going to enable you to get to your goals and enable you to do great work. As Eric said, be annoying with how much you say, can I help you? Can I help you? And if you go down that route, people feel empowered, and that empowerment is huge, because if people feel empowered, they're going to go above and beyond. They're going to hold themselves accountable and really, at the end of the day, create that really great team environment where everyone knows everyone's got each other's backs, and will really push that overall program forwards and help people if they're struggling, because we can't all be at 110% of performance all the time. we're going to have weeks where people dip to like a 70. We need to rally around that person and help them build up. But I think you also need to go and, as a leader, critically look at the org structure as well. So you're coming into an org structure that maybe is a bit messy. Maybe there are some things there that don't make sense, or maybe you have a manager that's creating like a toxic environment or something along those lines. And I think as a leader, you'd need to make some very clear decisions quite quickly on who is essentially not aligned with your plan and like why you've been brought in and your leadership style, and those who aren't, because those people who are not behind you are going to hold you back and need to think of a way to kind of work with them around that, or make some changes to the team. Not to sound too harsh, but if you're responsible for growing the business, you've got to make some of those calls.
One thing I guess I'll add to what both of you said, which I very much agree with, is I think when you're coming in for those first 90 days, like a way to help yourself while building that trust and rapport is really to incentivize the people around you to be your problem solvers. So, Phil, you mentioned like we don't need to dig into the whys of the past, but more so if you take it as an opportunity to start fresh and ask each individual, there's going to be a ton of people specializing in having really strong domain knowledge in these different areas that you don't. Say like, regardless of, what you were working on, like what are the biggest gaps you see? Like what would you prioritize over the next 90 days in X area of the program, in, the influencer program or SEO or SEM or email? What are your big gaps? What do you want me to know about as the problems? That, first of all, solves your discovery. It gives you a pipeline of potential problems that you can then communicate upwards, because you're probably coming in having already talked to, C-suite, finance, whatever, looking to solve problems top down. You also need to have a pipeline of problems bottom up to be able to be in the loop of what's going on and have built that rapport so people can come to you with, these are the gaps here and there and everywhere, and then empower them if they're in that position to prioritize solving those problems themselves or escalate them. But really making sure that regardless of what people have been focused on the past, like you're not going to be everywhere. And it's important that people feel that they can raise concerns and that knowledge is power for yourself, for your team, for the entire organization.
And let them relinquish the baggage too, I think is going to be key. Yeah. And like realize that this is a safe space. This is a place where I can raise different ideas and depart from the thinking of the past. So creating that environment, I think, is going to be key as well.
I have a practical question. We mentioned it before, working at an agency means that we get to see a lot of different organizations at a lot of different stages in their growth as an organization. And something that is somewhat common with organizations that are coming to us for help is that they're not even aligned internally, right? From a strategic standpoint, right? So like they may all be aligned that, hey, we need to grow, some North Star metric or something along those lines. But in terms of how we get there, how are we actually in alignment? And so I'm curious what you all think about, systems to do that, because from my perspective, the way that I sort of view management and leadership, I think about it as trying to manage those systems and not manage the individual pieces of the system, right? So is there a good feedback loop so that I get the information that I need to be a good leader? Is there, a regular cadence where I get to communicate the sort of vision and the direction of a particular set of programs that I'm, working on, et cetera? So, as a new VP of marketing going into this D2C environment, what kind of systems are you all looking for initially in order to set up and make sure that those feedback loops actually exist so that everyone knows the same thing, basically, what we're trying to accomplish?
Are you talking within your own marketing department as the new leader, or are you talking like interdepartmental, like between customer experience and sales? And
that's a great question. I mean, it could be both. I mean, yeah, I'm really curious about in the marketing environment specifically, what you would have direct purview over.
I think there's a ton to unpack there. So there's communication that goes both ways. I think you've outlined some of that already, Eric, where you have those one-on-one relationships. Those one-on-ones an amazing source of feedback, an amazing source of like what's going on deep within those teams and like what are the, I guess, boots on the ground challenges that they're actually facing. The broader level picture though can get lost in those.
We've seen it tons of times, right?
So many times. Basically having a weekly stand up with the whole team. What are the priorities this week? How are we as a complete marketing org, however many people we're talking about here, basically like a little mini weekly business review. What did we do last week? Are we aligned? Like, what are the things we're working on this week? What are the challenges that people have? So that can kind of be your weekly snapshot that gives people the kind of like, who's on the bus and like, where's the bus going this week? But then at a monthly level, have a longer term view. So great, where are we going? Where's that bus going over the next few months or quarters? And are we moving the needle on these like big swings that we know we need to do to move the program forwards? Because all those big swings can get lost on the day-to-day or the week-to-week. And then those monthly business reviews, if you will, or department reviews, that gets fed up the food chain too. So buy-in from exec teams and other departments could just look into that and say, cool, marketing has it figured out. Like we'll kind of leave them to it and enable them to grow. If we are being very specific and purposeful around what we're actually doing to grow the business. So I think there's layers, if you will, to communication and making sure we're aligning the team on an individual level, but also at that weekly and monthly cadence.
I'm curious how that scales up in a big team, like the weekly stand-up idea. Like I'm curious how it scales up because sometimes marketing is so big that it's like we even see it, the fracture between top of funnel and bottom of funnel, right? Brand versus performance teams.
You're just regionally.
Yeah, I mean, there's teams we work with who are 5 people and teams we work with who are 500. You can't have a weekly 500 person meeting. You could probably have like a big Slack update potentially or something that goes out of like top line, like, hey, here's how we're doing, make sure everyone's on the same page. But then you would enable if you're the VP, let's say, imagine your directors are doing those weeklies with smaller groups of people, but those directors are then the ones you're having weeklies with so that they are clear on priorities. They are clear on where the business is at. Because you want to make sure that like everyone throughout the organization is marching to the beat of the same drum. Methodology still works. I think it's just tactically how you work through that has to change because you don't want to bring 500 people into a meeting every week. That's not scalable.
Yeah, and you have to really invest in, okay, this is the system we're using, whether it's like a project management tool, a centralized like Sheets repo, like the communication tools, like you need to be very clear on just the brief of how do we actually organize from, the strategic plan down to how it's happening operationally. I like what you said about like thinking in different time frames so that we know that on a monthly basis these are the metrics that we need to look at, on a quarterly, on an annual, but that trickles down into smaller and smaller, especially when you think about like trickling down from like business goals to individual media channels and what they're optimizing towards and so on and so forth. So yeah, actually investing in alignment on what are the communication tools we're using, what are the places that those live, who needs to be informed, not only the different time cadence, but also the metrics that are important for those time cadence and what KPIs those flow from. Like, I think honestly, flow charting a lot of what like that organizing structure actually needs to happen, because it is going to happen that people will say, wait, why? Because they're focused on today. And you need to bring them back to the bigger picture of that big flow chart or that big roadmap and make sure that those documents exist and you're coming back to them every month, every quarter. Eric, when you're talking about cross-departmental, you need to have visibility into what that that other department's roadmap is. And when there's big interdependency, like you need to have those conversations about, okay, where does our objective fit in on that roadmap? And you need to have these bigger strategic planning conversations that happen on an annual, biannual, quarterly basis to make sure that, again, like Phil said, we're all marching to the same beat. It's a big effort, but that's what's needed to keep, 10, 50, 500 people all working in concert towards the stuff that matters.
And people want to know their why, right? They want to know, why am I doing this work? Why am I doing this challenge that I've never had to work on before because this new leader's in place? If you've got that monthly and weekly cadence of, like, as you said, where we are on that roadmap, it gives them a purpose and gives them a, like, oh, I get it now. Like, this feeds into the bigger plan, the bigger picture of where we're going, versus just, I'm being assigned a task to do this week and I don't know why I'm doing it. Especially for bigger teams, that can break down pretty quickly. Smaller teams, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because you'd be a lot more aligned naturally. But there's an element of like purpose and motivation in there that is worth a call out as well.
Cool.
I was waiting for a big leg challenge.
Yeah, I was waiting for him to be like, well, here's why you're wrong. No. So then I guess I want to get really tactical here for a second and ask, assuming this is a big e-commerce brand, right? We're looking at a lot of like big sales events that account for a lot of the years. Like, what are some of the rocks we're looking to turn over? Like, what are some of the historical metrics we want to, from your experience, would say are good ones to look at when we're evaluating how things have been performing?
Yeah, well, I guess again, like it starts with like what product you're selling. Some metrics are going to matter more than others depending on that. If you're like a multi-product big retailer, pulling e-commerce data and looking at actually like product trends and top products and the margins and costs behind those products, like all of that would be really important. If you're like primarily a subscription brand, looking at new versus returning customers and churn rates and LTV is going to be more important. I think like fundamentally what you want to come in and do is ask, okay, what are our sales channels? Where does that data live? How can I pull all of that together in one place and just look at the last few years of performance trends? Are we going up? Are we going down? And then start to unpack why. And then based on that product, dig into some of those different data points. I would also look at data outside of your actual e-commerce, first party data, and look at, as a marketer, competitive like market data, search trends, like any like research platform can help you see kind of how competitors are trending in terms of their spend. If you're new and coming in, what are all of our marketing channels? Like, how have they trended over time? Have we indexed way up in this one channel over the last few years? Are we primarily just bottom funnel? Like, starting to piece together all of those elements, you'll start to understand those bigger trends. And I think the key point is trends. Like, I think just coming in and looking at, we hit X in revenue last month is not super actionable, but if it's year over year, revenue is down by 10%, that's a lot more actionable. Then there's a story that you need to go figure out. Yeah, those are some of the places that I'd start.
I would probably tend to get a little bit nerdy at this point. Because you can think of metrics as like a hierarchy, right? And so a really simple example would be revenue as a function of purchases times AOV, right? And you could even break that down further and say purchases from new customers and purchases from existing customers times their respective AOVs, right? Well, new customer purchases is a function of how many new people we're reaching in the market times how many people we get to the website times how many people actually do some research on the website times how many people actually convert on the website, right? And so you can do this exercise for almost every single one of the programs within the marketing function, where you sort of build out all of the, this hierarchy of different metrics. And in fact, there's even tools that help with this kind of thing. Then, to Maddie's point, like, you want to understand the trends, but to me anyways, I always want to understand the anomalies. So, if there was a month last year where sales dipped or something, I want to know why, right? And so you start to dig into that metric hierarchy to understand sort of what were the levers that laddered up to sales being down, right? So that's essentially root cause analysis, right? And so sales were down. Was it new customers? Was it existing customers? Was it AOV? Was it conversion rate? Was it like traffic sources different? All those kinds of things, right? And so by being able to look back historically and look at all of the periods of variance where things were either higher or lower than the moving average, now we're starting to gather that context about how the business has changed over time. So yes, there's a trend over time, but also those anomalies might give you information about a test that was run, or give you information about, some market dynamic that changed, or some competitor that really heavied up in Q3 last year or whatever, right? So really kind of digging into those anomalies, I think, can be very, very helpful.
I think it definitely shows you like how vulnerable the business can be to certain trends or channels too. For example, we were running influencers every month and then we diverted them towards a different, like that spend towards a different bucket, and now sales dropped. Oh, wow. Okay. This is a really important foundation to our media success. Like, yeah, 100% leaning into especially dips, like, and trying to understand where those came from, help you better understand, what are the big cornerstones? Like, what do we really need to care about when it comes to change and, budget change? Like, what do we need to defend?
No, I think the biggest piece for me is trying to just understand the fundamentals of, well, how has the business been shifting, just like everyone's been saying, and build your own, I guess, hypotheses around exactly why that is, and come with all those themes in your 90-day review or gathering session, if you will, so that you can then start to build a roadmap off the back of that. Because it's very easy to kind of get down the wrong rabbit hole, if you will, because of what people might be kind of telling you and you're listening to, but the data doesn't lie.
Data lies all the time, Phil.
We don't have time for that.
It does lie sometimes.
I got to push back on that one.
That discovery then helps you understand where your data systems, maybe there's a break in tracking and there's an immediate priority for your first 90 days.
I knew as soon as I said that, I was like, Eric's going to chastise me for this one.
The wolves, they descend.
It can mislead.
Thank you for joining us today. I think we know a future topic, a future hypothesis, which is data doesn't lie. So stay tuned for that upcoming episode. But thank you so much.
This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks!